They say that when a person dies, the house they left behind takes a deep, final breath. For 4 days, I've been sitting in this silence, listening to that breath. It's the sound of dust settling on furniture that hasn't been moved in a decade. It's the sound of the refrigerator humming in an empty kitchen. But mostly, it's the silence of exhaustion. My name is Elena, and for the last 10 years, I haven't been a sister or a friend, or even a woman with a name. I have been a shadow. I have been the ghost that lived in the hallway between my mother's bedroom and the medicine cabinet. I have been the one who knew the exact difference between a tired sigh and a something is wrong sigh. My mother, Marguerite, passed away 4 days ago. She went quietly, her hand in mine, in the same bed where she brought 3 children into this world. And as I sat there in the dim light of the bedside lamp, watching the rise and fall of her chest stop for the very last time, I thought, it's over. We can both rest now. But I was wrong, because while I was counting heartbeats, my siblings were counting square footage. Elena? Elena, for heaven's sake, why is it so dark in here? It smells like a pharmacy. That's Claire, my older sister. She didn't come to the hospital the night Mom's kidney started to fail because she had a non-refundable deposit on a wellness retreat in Sedona. She arrived 3 hours after the funeral ended, draped in black silk that cost more than my entire wardrobe, and she hasn't stopped moving since. I'm standing in the kitchen, my hands gripped around a mug of tea that went cold an hour ago. I haven't turned the lights on because the shadows feel more honest than the glare of the bulbs. The lights are off because the sun hasn't gone down yet, Claire, I say. My voice feels like it's made of gravel. I haven't used it much lately. And it smells like medicine because this house was a pharmacy for 5 years. Claire walks into the kitchen, silhouetted by the light from the hallway. She's holding a pack of neon pink Post-it notes. She looks at the mahogany kitchen table, the one where we did our homework as kids, the one where I sat with Mom every morning for 10 years, and she slaps a pink sticker right in the center of the wood. Julian and I had a talk at the hotel last night, she says, her voice bright and terrifyingly professional. We need to be efficient, Elena. This house is 4,000 square feet of deferred maintenance. Every day it sits here, we're losing money on the market. I've already tagged the china cabinet and the silver. Julian wants the study furniture for his office. I look at the pink sticker. It looks like a wound on the wood. The funeral was yesterday, Claire, I whisper. Her tea is still in the cupboard. Her slippers are still by the radiator. Can we just breathe for a second? Claire sighs. It's that patronizing, poor Elena sigh I've heard since I was 12. We've been breathing for 10 years, honey. You've been breathing here, rent-free, while the rest of us were out in the real world building lives. You don't understand the overhead. The taxes alone on a property this size and this zip code, well, they'd swallow you whole in a month. You don't have a job, Elena. You don't have savings. We're doing this for your sake. We want to get you settled into something manageable. A nice little apartment. Something where you don't have to worry about the roof leaking. Rent-free. The words sting worse than a physical blow. I want to tell her about the rent I paid. I want to describe the nights I spent sleeping on a cot at the foot of Mom's bed because her dementia made her afraid of the dark. I want to tell her about the time I had to manually clear Mom's bowels because she was too embarrassed to let a nurse do it. I want to ask her how much rent she thinks 10 years of 24-hour medical care is worth on the open market. But I don't. I just stare at the cold tea. "That'll be Julian," Claire says, checking her gold watch. "He's brought the preliminary paperwork from the realtor. We're going to do a walkthrough. Try to be helpful, Elena. Don't make this harder than it already is." Julian walks in a moment later. He's the golden child, the CEO, the one whom Mom used to brag about to the neighbors, even though his busy schedule meant he only called her on Mother's Day and her birthday, and even then it was usually his secretary who placed the call. He walks into the kitchen and doesn't even look at me. He goes straight to the wall safe behind the pantry. "Elena, the code to the safe." He's already holding a leather briefcase. "I need to check for the deed and the insurance binders. We need to move fast if we want to hit the spring buyer's market." "I don't have it, Julian." I lie. "I know the code. It's 101482. My birthday. Mom changed it to that 3 years ago when she started forgetting things. She told me, 'Elena, if I lose my mind, I want you to have the keys to the kingdom, because you're the only one who knows what's inside it anyway.'" Julian huffs, a sharp sound of irritation. For God's sake, this is what happens when you leave a house to decay. Nobody knows where anything is. Fine, I'll call a locksmith tomorrow. "Claire, did you tag the jewelry upstairs?" "Mostly," Claire calls out from the hallway, "but I can't find the emerald brooch, the one from Grandma." They move through the house like a storm. I hear them upstairs. I hear drawers being pulled out and slammed shut. I hear the clinking of jewelry. I hear Julian complaining about the outdated wallpaper and how much they'll have to knock off the asking price to cover the renovations. They talk about our mother's home as if it were a carcass they were stripping for parts. I stay in the kitchen. I look at the sink. There's a single teaspoon sitting in the basin. It's the one I used to stir Mom's honey into her water on her last night. It's a small silver thing with a rose on the handle. I pick it up and hold it against my chest. They think I'm a failure because I didn't build a life. They don't realize that I spent 10 years building a bridge for someone to cross over into the next world with dignity. I walk out of the kitchen and toward my bedroom. It's the small room behind the stairs. It used to be a sewing room, but I moved my bed in there years ago so I could be closer to the kitchen for Mom's late-night needs. I sit on the edge of my narrow bed. The mattress is thin. My back aches. It's an ache that has been there for a decade, the physical weight of being someone else's legs, someone else's hands, someone else's memory. I reach under the bed and pull out a small blue velvet box. Inside isn't Grandma's emerald brooch. Claire will never find that. It's tucked away in a safe deposit box downtown, just like Mom wanted. Inside is a single USB drive and a letter. The letter is written in Mom's handwriting, the shaky, elegant script of a woman who was fighting to stay present even as the fog was rolling in. "Elena," it begins, "they are going to come for the house. I can see it in Julian's eyes when he looks at the walls, and I can hear it in Claire's voice when she talks about my legacy. They think they're the ones who inherited my life. They don't know that I've already given it to you. When the vultures start circling, Elena, don't scream. Just wait for the lawyer. Trust Mr. Henderson. He knows what to do." I close my eyes, and I can almost hear her voice. Trust Mr. Henderson. Julian and Claire think they're the lead characters in this tragedy. They think I'm just a background extra, the help that stayed too long. They have no idea that the rent has already been paid in full. I hear Julian coming back down the stairs. "Elena," he shouts, "where are the records for the property tax? The file in the study is empty." I stand up and put the blue box back under the bed. I smooth down my thrift store dress and take a deep breath. "I'll be right there, Julian," I call back. My voice isn't gravelly anymore. It's steady. I walk out into the hallway. I see the pink stickers everywhere. They're on the mirror, they're on the coat rack, they're even on the small stool Mom used to sit on to put on her shoes. I smile. Just a tiny private thing. Let them tag the furniture. Let them count the silver. Tomorrow is the reading of the will. Tomorrow they're going to find out that you can't buy a home with a pink Post-it note, and you certainly can't take one from a woman who has already spent 10 years defending it.
The morning of the will reading felt like a funeral all over again, but without the dignity. The sky was a bruised, heavy purple, and the rain was coming down in sheets, drowning out the birds that usually sang in the oak tree outside Mom's window. I was in the kitchen at 6 a.m. Habit is a cruel thing. My body didn't care that Mom was gone. It still woke me up with a jolt of cortisol, telling me I needed to check her vitals, heat her compress, and start the tea. I stood there in the dim light, looking at the stove, before I remembered. There was no one to wake up. I made a pot of coffee instead, the expensive kind Julian likes. I knew he'd be in a foul mood if he didn't have his caffeine before the business of the day began. By 9 a.m., the house was full of the sound of shuffling paper and expensive leather. Julian was in the dining room, his laptop open, his fingers flying across the keys. He was wearing a charcoal suit that looked like armor. Claire was draped across the velvet sofa in the parlor, her eyes fixed on her phone, her thumb scrolling through real estate listings. They weren't mourning. They were preparing for a heist. "That's Sterling," Julian called out, not even looking up from his screen. "Elena, get the door. And for God's sake, put a sweater on. You look like a pauper in that dress." I looked down at my black cotton dress. It was faded at the hem from too many washes. I didn't say a word. I walked to the front door and opened it. Mr. Sterling was the family's attorney for 40 years. He was a man made of tweed and mahogany, smelling faintly of old tobacco and a life spent protecting the assets of people like my father. He gave me a nod, the kind of nod you give a waitress you've seen a dozen times, but whose name you never bothered to learn. "Good morning, Elena," he said, shaking his umbrella outside. "A somber day, but a necessary one. Is Julian in the dining room?" "He is," I said. But as Sterling started to walk past me, I didn't close the door. I waited. I looked out into the rain, toward the end of the driveway. A second car, a modest silver sedan, pulled up. Julian came into the hallway, frowning. "Sterling, glad you're here. Let's get this over with. I've got a 3 p.m. conference call with the Singapore office." He stopped when he saw the door was still open. "Elena, what are you doing? It's freezing." "We're waiting for Mr. Henderson." The name hummed in the air like a cold mist. Julian's eyes narrowed. Claire stood up from the sofa, her heels clicking as she walked toward us. "Who is Mr. Henderson?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "A colleague," Sterling said, his own brow furrowing. 12. He's a different kind of lawyer, Julian. He deals mostly in private trusts and specialized estate planning. Mr. Henderson walked up the porch steps. He wasn't wearing tweed. He was wearing a sharp, dark raincoat and carrying a briefcase that looked like it had been through a war. He didn't look at Julian or Claire. He looked straight at me. "Elena," he said, his voice deep and steady, "I'm sorry for your loss. Your mother was a remarkable woman." "Thank you, Arthur," I said. I led them all into the dining room. The dining table was 10 feet long, solid mahogany. For years it had been covered with medical supplies, gauze, pill organizers, blood pressure cuffs. Now it was clear. Julian sat at the head, Claire sat to his right, Sterling sat at the foot. I sat in the middle, feeling like a witness at my own trial. Mr. Henderson sat directly across from me. "Very well," Sterling began, clearing his throat. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Marguerite Vance. The document I have is dated 5 years ago. It's a standard per stirpes distribution. The estate, including the liquid assets, the investment portfolio, and the primary residence, is to be divided equally among the 3 children, Julian, Claire, and Elena. Claire let out a long, audible breath of relief. She looked at the pink Post-it note on the china cabinet and smirked. However, Sterling continued, his voice wavering slightly as he looked at a second set of papers Henderson had just slid across the table, it appears there has been an amendment, or rather a series of actions taken in the last year. Julian leaned forward, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edge of the table. What kind of actions? Mom was on heavy medication for the last 18 months. She wasn't in any position to make changes. On the contrary, Mr. Henderson said. He pulled a folder from his bag. I have here 3 separate mental competency evaluations conducted by independent neurologists over the last 12 months. The most recent one was taken just 3 weeks before her passing. In all 3, your mother was found to be of perfectly sound mind, fully aware of her assets, and most importantly, fully aware of her intentions. What intentions? Claire hissed. Henderson looked at me, then back at Bem. 8 months ago, Marguerite Vance executed a life estate deed for this property. She transferred the title of the house and the surrounding 5 acres to Elena Vance. She retained what is called a life interest, which allowed her to reside here until her death. Upon her passing 4 days ago, the title transferred automatically and fully to Elena. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the rain hitting the roof like gravel. Julian's face went from pale to a terrifying mottled red. "You're lying," he whispered. "That's a $4 million property. She wouldn't give it to her." He pointed at me as if I were a piece of rotten fruit. "She's a librarian. She doesn't even know how to pay a utility bill." "The deed is recorded with the county, Julian. It's public record. Elena is the sole owner of this house. You and Claire are, legally speaking, guests." Claire's voice rose to a screech. "This is elder abuse. Elena, you've been in this house alone with her for years. You brainwashed her. You told her we didn't love her, didn't you? You sat here in the dark and dripped poison in her ear while you were supposed to be changing her bandages." I felt the familiar sting of tears, but I didn't let them fall. I looked at Claire, really looked at her. I saw the expensive filler in her cheeks and the desperation in her eyes. "I didn't have to tell you you didn't love her, Claire." My voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "I have a calendar. She kept it in her nightstand. She marked every day you didn't call. She marked every time Julian said he was coming for dinner and then sent a regrets text 30 minutes after the food was cold." "There's more," I said. Julian was shaking. "I'll have it overturned. I'll hire the best firm in the city. You won't get a cent of the investment money, Elena. I'll tie you up in court until you're dead." "About the investment money," Henderson interrupted. "The $4 million portfolio you're referring to, Julian, it's gone. Your mother liquidated it over the last 2 years. She used the funds to establish the Marguerite Vance Caregiver Trust. It's an irrevocable trust designed to provide salaries, health insurance, and respite care for family members who are acting as full-time caregivers." Julian's jaw dropped. "She spent the whole inheritance? All of it?" "Not all of it," Henderson said with a small, sharp smile. "She left $50,000 to each of you. She said it was exactly what she spent on your private school tuitions 30 years ago. She considered the debt settled." "I'm going to kill you," Claire whispered, looking at me. "Wait," I said, pointing to Sterling's laptop. "Mom wanted you to hear it from her." I reached over and hit the play button. The screen flickered to life. It was Mom. She was sitting in her chair by the window. She was wearing her favorite blue sweater, the one I'd washed by hand 100 times. She looked thin, her skin like parchment, but her eyes were sharp. They were the eyes of the woman who used to run the city library with an iron fist. "Julian, Claire," she said. Her voice was thin, but it held that old, familiar authority. "If you're watching this, it means the lawyers have told you the news. It means you're likely screaming at Elena right now, or perhaps you're already dialing a phone to see how you can sue her." She paused, taking a slow, shallow breath. "I want to make one thing very clear. This was my choice. For 10 years, I watched Elena wither in this house so that I didn't have to. I watched her lose her friends. I watched her bank account hit zero. I watched her back bend from the weight of me. And I also watched you two. I watched you treat her like a servant. I watched you treat me like an inconvenience that was taking too long to expire. Claire let out a sob, half rage, half shock. Julian stood frozen. Julian, Mom continued on the screen, I know about the audit at your firm. I know you were counting on this house to cover the holes in your books. That's why you're not getting it. I won't let my home be used to pay for your dishonesty. And Claire, I know about the boutique hotel. I know you've been using the charity money I gave you to pay for your lifestyle. You've both had enough of me. Now you'll have nothing. Elena is the only one who earned this. She is the only one who loved the woman, not the estate. The screen went black. The only sound in the room was the rain. It felt like the house had grown smaller. Julian stood up slowly. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the little brother I used to protect from bullies. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, murderous mask. You think you've won, Elena, he said, his voice a low hiss. You're a librarian with a drafty old house and no friends. You think you can maintain this place? You think you can live here alone with your ghosts? I'll give you 6 months before you're begging me to buy it from you for pennies. I'm not alone, Julian, I said, my voice getting stronger. I have the house, I have the trust, and for the first time in 10 years, I have a future that doesn't involve waiting for someone to die. Get out, I added, my voice getting stronger. Claire, take your Post-it notes. Julian, take your briefcase. You have until Sunday to remove anything that belongs to you. After that, I'm changing the locks and the security code.
The 3 days following the will reading were the quietest of my life, and yet the loudest. Without the constant hum of the oxygen concentrator or the rhythmic shuffle of Mom's slippers, the house felt like it was expanding. Every floorboard I stepped on seemed to groan under the weight of a decade of secrets. I spent those days cleaning, not just dusting, but purging. I peeled every single one of Claire's pink Post-it notes off the furniture. I watched them curl up in the trash can like shriveled petals. It felt like I was reclaiming territory, inch by agonizing inch. But I wasn't just cleaning. I was being watched. I'd see Julian's car, that black predatory SUV, idling at the end of the driveway at 2 a.m. He wouldn't get out. He'd just sit there, his headlights cutting through the rain, a silent reminder that he wasn't going away. And Claire? Claire had taken to social media. My phone, which had been silent for years, was suddenly exploding with notifications. Mutual friends, distant cousins, people I hadn't spoken to since high school. They were all sending me the same link. Claire had posted a tribute to Mom, a beautiful black and white photo of the two of them from a decade ago. But the caption? The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive cruelty. Heartbroken to say goodbye to Mom, it read. Even more heartbroken that her final days were spent in isolation, influenced by those who sought to keep her from her family. We are praying for justice and for Mom's true wishes to be honored. Sometimes the people closest to the bedside are the ones with the darkest hearts. The comments were a bloodbath. How could she? Is it true Elena blocked your calls? Total financial elder abuse. I sat on the floor of the hallway, the glow of the screen washing over my face, and I felt that old familiar shame. For a second, I was that little girl again, the one Julian and Claire used to blame when a vase broke or a window was left open. I felt small. I felt like the pauper Julian said I was. But then I looked at the wall. I looked at the spot where the wallpaper was slightly faded because that's where Mom's bed had been. I remembered the night she grabbed my wrist and told me she'd been watching. She hadn't just been watching me, she'd been watching them. I went to the study. Julian had called it his office, but he'd never spent more than 10 minutes in it. I sat in the high-backed leather chair and pulled the key Mom had given me around my neck. I opened the bottom drawer, the one with the false back. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a series of ledgers, blue, black, and red. Mom was a librarian by trade and a bookkeeper by soul. She didn't trust digital clouds. She trusted ink and paper. I opened the blue ledger first. It was a log of every penny she had ever loaned to her children. April 2021. Julian, $50,000. Bridge loan for the firm. Not repaid. September 2022. Claire, $15,000. Emergency boutique repairs. Found out she spent it on a cruise to Ibiza. As I flipped the pages, the numbers grew larger and the notes grew more frequent. But it wasn't just the money. Mom had kept a diary of their visits, or lack thereof. She had transcribed their phone calls. I found a page dated November 14th, 2024, my birthday. I remembered that day. I'd spent it at the hospital with Mom while she had a gallbladder scare. Julian had called. I'd put him on speakerphone so Mom could hear him. In the ledger, Mom had written, Julian called. He spoke for 6 minutes. 4 minutes were about his stock options. 1 minute was about the weather. He spent the final minute asking if I had updated the deed to the lake house yet. He didn't realize I was recording. He didn't even wish Elena a happy birthday. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. My mother hadn't been a helpless victim of dementia. She had been a silent witness, documenting the slow decay of her children's character. But then I found the black ledger. This was the one that made my breath catch in my throat. It contained copies of emails Julian had sent to his CFO, emails he'd accidentally BCC'd to Mom's old AOL account, thinking she'd never check it. Emails discussing moving funds from the employee pension plan to cover a personal debt. Julian wasn't just greedy, he was a criminal. He was facing a catastrophic collapse, and he'd been banking on the sale of this house to hide his crimes. Crash! I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. I ran to the kitchen. A brick lay on the linoleum, surrounded by shards of the window. Tied to the brick was a note scrawled in Julian's jagged, angry handwriting. This isn't over, Elena. Give us the keys by Friday, or I'll make sure the police are the ones who come for you next. We know about the medication you gave her. I stood there looking at the broken glass, and for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't afraid. I felt a surge of white-hot anger that burned away the last of my hesitation. They wanted a fight? They wanted to talk about medication and influence. I picked up the phone. I didn't call the police. I called Mr. Henderson. Arthur, I said, my voice steady. The vultures are back, but I found the ledgers. I found everything. I thought you might, Henderson said, his voice a calm anchor. What do you want to do, Elena? I want to invite them over, one last time, to help them pack. Julian and Claire walked in an hour later. They looked triumphant. They thought the brick through the window had broken me. Julian was holding a folder of legal papers, likely a fraudulent injunction. Claire was holding her phone, probably ready to record my breakdown. Ready to be reasonable, Elle? Julian asked, stepping over the broken glass. We've got the paperwork right here. You sign over your interest, we give you $100,000, and this all goes away. No police, no scandal. You just disappear. I was sitting at the dining room table, the blue and black ledgers laid out in front of me like a feast. Sit down, Julian. Claire, put the phone away. You're going to want your hands free for what comes next. Don't test me, Elle, Julian snarled. I have friends in the DA's office. I can have you investigated for... For what, Julian? For the $200,000 you borrowed from Mom's medical trust last year? Or should we talk about the $1.2 million missing from your company's pension plan? Julian froze. His hand, which had been reaching for his pen, stopped midair. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a ghost. Where did you get that?" he whispered. "Mom was a librarian, Julian," I said, tapping the black ledger. "She knew how to file things. She knew how to look for what was missing. She spent her final year making sure that if you ever tried to hurt me, I'd have the rope to hang you with." I looked at Claire. "And you told everyone I isolated her. Mom has recordings, Claire, recordings of you telling her that she was taking too long to die and that you were tired of smelling her sickness. Do you think your social media followers would like to hear those? Do you think the board of your charity would like to know where that $15,000 for the boutique hotel really came from?" Claire's mouth fell open. She looked like she was about to faint. "This is what's going to happen," I said, standing up. I felt 10 feet tall. "Julian, you are going to resign. You are going to use that $50,000 Mom left you to start paying back what you stole. If you ever, and I mean ever, attempt to contest this will or contact me again, these ledgers go straight to the SEC and the DA. And Claire," I turned to her, "you are going to post a public apology. You are going to tell the truth that I was the only one here and that you were the one who stayed away. And then you both are going to leave this house. You aren't taking the silver. You aren't taking the china. You are taking your Post-it notes and your lies, and you are never coming back." "You're a monster," Claire whispered, her voice trembling. "No," I said, looking her in the eye. "I'm the woman who spent 10 years learning how to survive you. Now get out." Julian didn't say a word. He turned and walked out the door, his shoulders slumped, the golden child finally broken by the weight of his own shadow. Claire followed him sobbing, her phone dropped and forgotten on the rug. I stood in the doorway and watched their tail lights disappear into the rain. The house felt lighter. The air felt cleaner. I went back to the study and sat down. I looked at the USB drive. There was still that one folder left for the morning of the first year. The front door stayed shut for a week after Julian and Claire left. I didn't just lock it, I bolted it, as if by turning those metal gears I could somehow lock out the last 10 years of my life. The first night was the hardest. I sat in the kitchen until 4 a.m., my ears straining for the sound of Mom's bell. I kept thinking I heard her call my name, that raspy, urgent, "Elena," that used to pull me out of the deepest sleep. I'd half rise from my chair, my heart hammering, before the silence of the house would settle back over me like a cold shroud. I was a soldier who had spent a decade in the trenches, only to find the war was over and I had forgotten how to live in the peace. I went to the refrigerator. It was still filled with things she couldn't eat anymore: pureed peaches, thickened water, high-protein shakes. I started pulling them out, one by one. I looked at the expiration dates. Some of them were months old. I had been so busy keeping her alive that I had stopped checking the world's clock. I emptied them into the sink. The sound of the disposal grinding felt like it was chewing up my old life. I realized then that I didn't know what I liked to eat. I didn't know what time I liked to go to bed when it wasn't dictated by a pill schedule. For 42 years, I'd been a daughter, a sister, and a nurse. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, I didn't see any of those things. I just saw a woman with tired eyes and a house that was finally, terrifyingly, her own. It was on the 7th day that I remembered the attic. When Julian and Claire were kids, the attic was their kingdom, filled with their sports trophies and Claire's pageant dresses.
But for me, the attic had been a graveyard. It was where I'd hidden my drawing pads and my charcoal sets the day Julian told me that artists don't pay the bills and Mom's health took its first major turn. I climbed the pull-down stairs, the dust dancing in the narrow beams of light. It smelled of cedar and old paper. I moved past Julian's old football gear and Claire's discarded vanity. In the very back, under a heavy canvas tarp, I found it. My old drafting table. But it wasn't dusty. Someone had covered it with a clean white sheet. I pulled the sheet back, and my heart stopped. There, sitting on the table, was a brand new set of professional charcoal pencils and a stack of high-quality vellum. And pinned to the center was a note in Mom's shaky, elegant hand. I never threw them away, Elena. I just kept them safe for when you were ready to draw again. I sat down at the table. My fingers felt clumsy as I picked up a pencil. I realized while she was watching me, she was watching me. She saw the way I looked at the patterns on the wallpaper. She saw the way I'd sketch in the dirt with a stick while she sat in the garden. I opened the final folder on the USB drive then. It wasn't more bank records. It was a single audio file. I hit play. "Elena?" Her voice came through the laptop, soft as a secret. "The house is a shell. The money is a tool. But your hands were made for beauty, not just for bandages. The first year will be hard. You'll feel like you're betraying me by being happy. Don't. Every brushstroke you make is a thank you to me. Now go to work." It has been exactly 1 year since the vultures left. The pink Post-it notes are a distant memory. The house doesn't smell like a pharmacy anymore. It smells like fresh paint, jasmine, and the soup I just made for our new guests. I didn't sell the house. I used the Caregiver trust to do something Julian would never understand. I turned the ground floor into a respite retreat. Right now, there is a woman named Sarah upstairs. She's sleeping for the first time in 3 days while a professional nurse sits with her father in the sunroom. I don't charge them a cent. Mom's liquidated millions pay for the staff. Julian called me last week. He's working at a hardware store in a town I've never heard of. He sounded smaller. He didn't ask for money. He asked if I still had the old photo of him in his graduation gown. I told him I did, and that I'd mail it to him. I don't hate him anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I need all mine for the attic. Claire is still Claire. She's on her 3rd influencer apology tour, pretending she was the one who suggested the Caregiver retreat. I let her pretend. The truth doesn't need her permission to exist. I spend my afternoons in the attic. I'm designing a line of textiles now, fabrics with patterns based on the flowers in Mom's garden. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that when I look in the mirror now, I don't see a ghost. I see a woman who stood her ground. So if you're listening to this and you feel like the unseen one, if you're the one holding the hand of a dying parent while your siblings argue over the silver, just remember this. You aren't a servant. You are the keeper of the soul. And when the dust settles, the house will always belong to the heart that stayed. When the front door finally slammed shut behind Julian and Claire for the last time, the house didn't feel empty. It felt like a vacuum. You know that feeling when a high-pitched noise finally stops and your ears ring with the sudden absence of it? That was my life. For 42 years, I had lived under the frequency of my siblings' expectations and my mother's needs. Now, for the first time, the frequency was 0. I stood in the center of the foyer, my breath hitching in my chest. I looked at the floor where Julian's expensive leather shoes had scuffed the wood. I looked at the spot where Claire had dropped her silk scarf in her haste to flee the truth. I didn't pick it up. I let it lie there, a discarded piece of a life that no longer had a seat at my table. The first night was the hardest. Habit is a ghost that doesn't know it's dead. At 8 p.m., I found myself standing by the stove, reaching for the small pot I used to heat Mom's evening broth. My hand was halfway to the handle before I remembered there was no broth to make. At 10 p.m., I walked toward her room to check her oxygen levels, my feet moving on autopilot, avoiding the creaky floorboard in the hall out of a decade-old instinct not to wake her. I stood in her doorway, the moonlight spilling across her empty bed. The sheets were pulled taut, the way the funeral directors had left them. The silence wasn't peaceful yet. It was heavy. It was a silence that asked me a question I wasn't ready to answer. Who are you, Elena, when you aren't a nurse? The next morning, the town began to talk. In a place this small, secrets don't leak, they flood. By noon, I saw the neighbors peering over the hedges. I saw Mrs. Gable from 3 doors down walking her dog past my driveway 4 times in an hour. They had seen the black SUV roar away. They had seen the lawyers. They were waiting for the help to be evicted. I walked out to the mailbox, my back straight, my head held high. Mrs. Gable stopped. "Elena, dear," she called out, her voice dripping with that artificial honey people use when they want gossip. We heard Julian was moving things out. Is everything all right? We're so worried about what will happen to this beautiful old place." I looked at her. For 10 years, Mrs. Gable hadn't once offered to bring a meal or sit with Mom so I could go to the dentist. "The house is fine, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice steady. "In fact, it's finally in good hands. I'm the owner now. If you see a locksmith raider, don't be alarmed. I'm just making sure only the right people have the keys." The look on her face was worth every 3 a.m. wake-up call I ever endured. But the real work was inside. I went back to the blue ledger, the one Mom had titled The Foundation of Truth. I began to read the entries I had skipped in the heat of the confrontation. Mom hadn't just tracked Julian's debts or Claire's lies, she had tracked me. In the back pages, I found a section labeled Elena's Silences. It was a list of every time I turned down a date, every time I canceled a gallery opening, every time I stayed silent when Julian insulted me. May 12th, Mom wrote, Elena received a letter from the design school. They offered her a part-time teaching position. She hid the letter in the recycle bin so I wouldn't see it. She thinks she's protecting my feelings. She doesn't realize she's breaking my heart. My daughter is a lion living in a cage I didn't mean to build. I have to make sure the door is open when I'm gone. I sat on the floor of the study, the ledger in my lap, and I wept. I didn't weep for the years I lost. I wept for the fact that she knew. All those times I thought I was being invisible, I was being seen by the only person that mattered. By the 3rd day, the retaliation started. I received a formal letter from a city law firm, not Julian's usual firm, but a bulldog firm known for predatory litigation. They were questioning the validity of the life estate deed. They were alleging undue influence and diminished capacity. They were demanding a full audit of the Caregiver Trust. Julian couldn't help himself. Even faced with the evidence of his own crimes, his ego wouldn't let him lose to the little sister. I didn't panic. I didn't call him. I took the letter, walked to the fireplace, and watched the expensive stationery turn to ash. Then I called Mr. Henderson. "Arthur," I said, "he's trying to fight the deed. He sent a bulldog firm." "Let them bark, Elena. Your mother spent $50,000 on a private investigator for a reason. We haven't even shown them the photographs yet." "Photographs?" I asked. "The ones of Julian meeting with his creditors at the casino last year while your mother was in surgery. He told you he was at a charity gala. Your mother had him followed. She knew he was gambling away his future, and she wasn't going to let him gamble away yours. I'll send the cease and desist packet today. It includes the casino logs. I doubt we'll hear from that firm again." I hung up the phone and looked around the room. The house felt different. It didn't feel like a pharmacy or a museum anymore. It felt like a fortress. I spent the rest of the day in the attic. I moved the old furniture, the boxes of golden child trophies, and the racks of Claire's old pageant dresses into the center of the room. I cleared a path to the window, the one that looks over the oak grove. I found an old easel, one I'd bought in college and hidden away. I set it up in the light. I didn't start painting yet. I just stood there, looking at the blank canvas. For the first time in my life, there was no one calling my name. There were no injections to give. There were no bank statements to hide. There was just the light, the wood, and the silence. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like a question. It felt like an answer.
People ask me how I survived that first year. They look at the house now with its fresh coat of cream-colored paint and the garden that is finally free of weeds, and they think it happened overnight. They think a will is read, a check is signed, and suddenly the trauma of a decade vanishes like mist. It didn't. Healing is a renovation. It's loud, it's messy, and half the time you find more rot under the floorboards than you expected. But the beauty of owning the house is that you get to decide what's worth saving. 1 year ago, this house was a place of ending. Today, it is a place of beginning. I don't live here alone anymore. Well, I do, but the walls are never lonely. I used the Marguerite Vance Caregiver Trust to do exactly what Mom and I whispered about during those long, dark nights. I turned the East Wing, the part Julian wanted to turn into a luxury suite, into a respite center. I have 3 rooms. They are always full. Right now, in room 2, there is a woman named Maria. She's 45, a school teacher who has spent the last 3 years caring for her mother with Alzheimer's. When she arrived on Monday, she had circles under her eyes so dark they looked like bruises. She was shaking. She told me she hadn't slept more than 4 hours at a time in 1,000 days. I took her bags. I showed her the room with the blackout curtains and the high thread count sheets. I told her, for the next 7 days, you aren't a nurse, you aren't a daughter, you are a guest. My staff will handle the medication, my chef will handle the meals. Your only job is to remember who you are when you're sleeping. I watched her cry. I didn't hug her. Sometimes when you're that tired, a hug is just another thing you have to handle. I just closed the door and let her sleep. Seeing her rest is the greatest revenge I've ever taken. Every time a caregiver walks through my door and realizes they aren't alone, Julian and Claire lose all over again. Speaking of my siblings, the Bulldog law firm disappeared within 48 hours of receiving Mr. Henderson's packet. Julian didn't go to prison, but he didn't stay a CEO either. The board forced him out quietly. He's living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a city where no one knows his name. He works for a logistics company now, entry level. He called me last month. His voice was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sort of hollowed-out weariness. He didn't ask for money. He asked if I still had the blue ribbons he'd won in the 3rd grade track meet. "They're in a box in the attic, Julian," I said. "I'll mail them to you." "Elena," he said, and for a second he sounded like the brother I used to know. I'm sorry. About the brick. About everything." I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't, but I did say, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Julian," and then I hung up. Forgiveness isn't about letting them back in, it's about letting the weight of them go. Claire is still chasing the sun. She's on her 4th reinvention in Malibu. She posted a video recently about minimalist living, standing in a white-walled house that someone else is paying for. She hasn't called. She hasn't apologized. She still tells people I stole her heritage. I realize that Claire's tragedy is that she can only feel big if she makes someone else feel small. But since I'm no longer small, she has nothing to say to me. I spend my afternoons in the attic. My drafting table is covered in sketches, not of medicine bottles or hospital beds, but of the oak trees outside. I've started a textile line, Marguerite's Garden. The patterns are intricate, based on the moss and the bark and the way the light hits the leaves at 4 p.m. I had my first gallery show last month. I didn't invite the neighbors or the golden children. I invited the women from the respite center. I invited the nurses who helped me during Mom's final days. As I stood in that room surrounded by my own work, I realized something. Julian and Claire spent their lives trying to be something. I spent my life trying to save someone, and in the end, it was the saving that made me. If you are listening to this and you are sitting in a dark kitchen while the rest of the world sleeps, if you are the one who stays when everyone else runs, if you are the unseen pillar holding up a falling house, don't let them tell you that you are losing your life. You are building a soul. The vultures will always circle the money, but they can't touch the peace. My name is Elena. I am a designer, I am a protector, and I am finally the owner of my own story.